73 years old, still fit as a fiddle, my husband got down on one knee and proposed. Only he wasn't proposing to me. He was proposing to his ex-girlfriend, and he wanted me at their wedding to watch the whole spectacle. That was when I decided, if he wanted to embarrass me, I'd reveal 3 truths that would ruin everything for them both. What if the only person you ever loved could casually toss you aside just when you thought life was settling into a calm, steady rhythm? That was me, your ordinary woman turned ex-wife overnight. My name is Penny, and I was married to Robert Carlyle. He was the kind of man who looked timeless, silver hair brushed back neatly, expensive suits tailored to make him look like a retired movie star. When I was younger, maybe it was that same air of maturity that dazzled me, made me think age was just a number. I was only 39 when we got married. He was a widower, 57. Everyone said I was crazy, but for over a decade, I believed I had the perfect husband. And then came year 16, my sweet illusions shattered. I remember the day he told me. I was in the kitchen, wearing an apron still dusted with flour from making homemade biscuits. Robert was leaning against the sink, swirling a glass of iced tea, looking every bit the relaxed retiree. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. He set the glass down, exhaled, and gave me that gentle smile he always used when delivering unsettling news. "Penny," he began, voice calm as if discussing a home repair, "I've reconnected with my old flame." It didn't sink in at first. Old flame? I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to make sense of his tone. What does that mean? He took a long sip of his tea. "A woman I knew before my first wife. We dated in high school, lost touch, you know how it goes. Well, I bumped into her at a charity event. We started talking. Things rekindled." He offered a small shrug. "It happened fast." I waited for him to laugh, to say he was joking, but he didn't. My stomach felt hollow. Was this a breakup speech? Was he saying he wanted a divorce? Looking back, I think I almost wanted it to be that simple. Instead, Robert pushed the glass away and ran a hand over his immaculate hair. "I never intended to hurt you," he continued. "But Harriet, she's the one that got away, Penny. All these years I've wondered about her, then there she was, I'm sorry." My throat tightened. "So, what do you want me to do with that information?" He smiled, so disarmingly calm. "I'm going to marry her." A cold wave of shock rolled through me. "Marry her?" I felt my back press into the counter. "Are you even divorced from me?" "No," he said, wincing. "That's why we need to talk." He was 73 now, Harriet 71, a pair of old sweethearts swirling back into each other's lives. It sounded like a romance novel, but I was living the darkest chapter of it. I found myself pinned in place, listening to the man who'd slept beside me for 16 years speak about leaving, as if it were no more complicated than switching seats at a restaurant. Yet the strangest part was that Robert proposed something else, too, something that turned my sorrow into rage. He wanted me at his wedding. The soon-to-be bride, Harriet, was insisting on clean breaks and friendly blessings, as if dragging me in to watch them exchange vows was the final bow on some twisted, polite arrangement. I just stared, letting that betrayal wash over me. He left the kitchen, my tears still unshed. I stood there silently until the timer on the oven went off, startling me back into reality. My biscuits burned to a crisp. In the days that followed, I tried to process the madness. I was past heartbreak. There was a numbness inside me I can't fully explain. Robert apologized once or twice, but that was it. He was more concerned about how Harriet might perceive me than how I might feel. I wasn't sure if that made him cruel or simply clueless. I suppose he believed I'd handle the news with maturity. Or maybe he thought I was too docile to fight back. I still recall the first time Harriet called me. It was dinner time and the phone rang. For a wild second, I thought it was a telemarketer. Then her voice, a voice that felt older, confident, with a slight rasp, floated through the receiver. "Penny, dear, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Harriet, Bob's fiancée." She paused, as though gauging my reaction. I stayed silent. "I'm sure this is uncomfortable, but I'd like to invite you to the wedding. Bob wants you there too, to show there's no bad blood between us. He speaks so highly of you, said you'd understand." I see, I murmured. My chest felt like it was caving in. I appreciate the courtesy call. She continued, I know it's awkward, but I'd love for you to attend, maybe even say a few words. Bob wants your blessing, if possible. You and I are both grown women, no sense in bad feelings. We can all be civil. Civil, like it was up to me to maintain calm while my husband left me for an ex from 5 decades ago. I found my voice trembling as I tried to respond. I'm not sure how comfortable. Think it over, she said breezily. Trust me, it'll be a lovely ceremony. The date's in 3 weeks. Bob told me you might consider coming. 3 weeks, so that was it. They already had a venue, a date, presumably a guest list. I realized that my role was to stand there, a token witness to prove Harriet had won. The conversation ended politely, Harriet urging me to consider. I set the phone down carefully, hands shaking. That night I dreamed I was wearing my wedding dress, my old one from my marriage to Robert. Only in the dream I was forced to stand behind Harriet's altar, watching them recite vows. Then Robert turned around and told me to clap as he kissed her. I woke up furious, tears sliding down my face, pillows damp with my sobbing. Okay. People who say love hurts rarely mention the quiet, dull throbs that come afterward. The heartbreak you carry in your back pocket. I felt that ache, but I also felt something else, indignation. Maybe Harriet was right that no sense in bad feelings could make sense for two strangers. But after 16 years of marriage and no warning, how dare they both expect me to sign off on it? 2 days before the wedding, Harriet called again. She had no idea how icy my mood was. She rattled off final details. It would be a sweet, small ceremony in a historic chapel. She hoped I would arrive early. She even asked if I'd help Robert with some wedding tasks. My nails dug into my palm as I listened to her casual requests. She ended the call, "Thank you, Penny. Really, I know it can't be easy. I appreciate your grace." I clicked off. Grace, I thought bitterly, sure. If grace meant letting them skip away in naive happiness while I was tossed aside, I couldn't do it. If Harriet wanted me to attend, I would attend. But she had no idea what that would mean. Robert was equally deluded. I remember him approaching me the day before the ceremony, remarking on how sad he was that I hadn't seemed supportive. He offered me some hush money, too, enough to cover a decent condo if I wanted out of our home. A quick signature, an uncontested divorce. You'll be taken care of, he assured me, as though I should be grateful. In that moment, I knew I was done playing the docile wife. They wanted me at the wedding, they'd get me, and I would bring with me 3 truths Harriet and Robert had conveniently ignored, 3 truths that, when revealed, would ruin their wedding day for good. Okay. The day arrived. Harriet wore an elegant vintage lace gown, her age showing only in the slight stoop of her shoulders, though her hair was impeccably styled in a low chignon. Robert looked dapper in a black tuxedo, hair parted neatly. I arrived just as Harriet was about to walk down the aisle. It was a small gathering of about 30 people, mostly Harriet's children, grandchildren, and a few of Robert's acquaintances who, to my surprise, gave me polite waves. I wasn't sure if they pitied me, or if Robert had spun a story that cast me as the good sport. The chapel smelled of fresh roses. Candles glowed on every windowsill. A classical quartet played gentle music that fluttered around the pews. I stood at the back, heart thudding, and tried to find a steady breath. Robert caught my eye from the front. He gave a slight, grateful smile, my stomach clenched. Harriet turned her head, also noticing me. She nodded as if to say, "Join us." It took all my strength to walk down the aisle and slide into a pew near the front. The quartet ended their piece. Harriet and Robert were about to take center stage. The minister cleared his throat, preparing to begin. I stared at their clasped hands, Harriet's diamond sparkling in the candlelight. He was making a vow to be faithful. He, the man who'd basically told me I was fine with it, that I'd understand. A wave of something inside me broke. This was it, my moment. I stood up. Every head in the chapel turned. "Penny," Robert murmured, confused. Harriet stiffened, her expression darkening. Maybe I was expected to deliver a sweet good luck toast, but I had something else in mind. "This won't take long," I said, trying to steady the tremor in my voice. "I'm Penny Carlyle, Robert's wife, well, I guess soon to be ex-wife. Thank you for having me, Harriet." I mustered a polite smile. "I'm so honored to be here witnessing the union of these two lovebirds." I heard a ripple of uneasy laughter from a few guests. They didn't know where this was going. Robert gave me a discreet warning glance, his eyes threatening me to keep quiet. Harriet's cheeks tightened in a forced smile. The minister looked around awkwardly. I gave him a small nod of reassurance, then focused on the bride and groom. Robert insisted he wanted me here, and Harriet asked for my blessing. Today, I do have something to share. 3 truths, in fact. 3 truths that might give Harriet a fuller picture before she says I do. I felt my heart pounding, my body trembled, but I pressed on. Truth number 1, I said, Robert's finances aren't what you think. For years, Harriet, you might heard how stable and wealthy he is. But he burned through his investments propping up a failed real estate deal last year, money I inherited from my grandmother. It's mostly gone. He never told you, did he, dear? Gasps flickered through the crowd. Harriet's eyes hardened at Robert, who stood there with a stunned expression. She gave him a quick glance that said, "Is it true?" Robert sputtered, That's private. Penny, this is not the place to discuss." But I lifted my chin. "You brought me here, Robert. This is exactly the place. As of last month, you sold half your shares just to keep up appearances, didn't you?" I locked eyes with him. "You told Harriet you still have a condo in Miami. It's gone too, sold to pay off your debt." Harriet's grandchildren stared at one another wide-eyed. The hush in the chapel was deafening. Harriet's face turned pale. I drew a breath. "Truth number 2, I said, voice tightening. "Do you know how Robert ended his last marriage?" That was a bombshell. Harriet's lips thinned. Robert had always painted himself as a gentle widower. In reality, as I found out only after we were wed, his first marriage ended in heartbreak. His late wife had planned to file for divorce, fed up with his affairs, but she fell ill. She never got to sign the paperwork, she passed away. He inherited everything. And soon after, I came into the picture with no clue how miserable his first wife had really been. "He never told me that," Harriet said, voice trembling. "Of course not," I replied, letting the bitterness seep into my words. "But you should hear it. He once told me, bragging over too many drinks, that he was relieved she'd died, because it saved him half his fortune." More horrified gasps. "Does that sound like a caring husband to you, Harriet? He's not a man who loves deeply, he's a man who uses women, and you're next in line, my dear." Robert's face flushed red with fury. "Stop," he hissed, eyes darting to Harriet. "It was just an ugly joke. Penny, please, that's enough." But Harriet didn't look like she believed him. She stared at him, mouth parted, disbelief carving lines across her features. A few guests whispering in the back pews rose to see more clearly. Some looked appalled, others looked enthralled by the drama. But I wasn't finished. My entire body was shaking now, either from fear or the adrenaline of vengeance. But I pushed on. "Finally, truth number 3, Harriet, the last time Robert saw you, he came home and admitted to me he felt pity for you." I remembered that night so clearly. He had said, "Poor Harriet never found real happiness after me. She's lonely, maybe even desperate." He was smirking, not exactly in love, just enjoying the power. "He's marrying you because he thinks you're old, fragile, easy to manipulate, and with money of your own. That's your appeal to him." I fought back tears, my voice splitting. "I know you love him, Harriet, but I'm telling you he's a man who finds joy in controlling women. You think you're special to him?" I shook my head. "He'll bleed you dry." A hush so deep fell across the chapel, I could hear the air conditioning hum. Robert moved first, grabbing the minister's microphone. "That is enough, Penny," he bellowed, face contorted in rage. "Get out." I stepped back, ignoring the lump in my throat. I fought tears, fought humiliation, and turned toward Harriet. She looked as if she'd been slapped. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She had no idea how thoroughly he had lied, and now she did. My last words, trembling with heartbreak, were, "This is the truth, Harriet. Take it or leave it." With that, I turned on my heel and walked down the aisle, guests shifting aside to let me pass. No one said a word. Through blurred vision, I pushed open the tall chapel doors and burst into the bright daylight. Outside, I realized I was shaking so badly I could hardly stand. But I felt free. Free from the shame that they tried to force on me. Free from swallowing the betrayal in silence. Behind me, the chapel buzzed with chaos. I imagine Harriet peppered Robert with questions. Maybe half the guests left. Maybe Harriet stormed out in tears. I didn't linger to find out. I felt weightless for the first time in weeks. Yes, my heart was broken. But that heartbreak was overshadowed by the sense that I had regained something vital, my dignity.
Okay.
Later that evening, Harriet called me. My phone rattled on the kitchen counter. I picked up, bracing for a fight, but to my shock, she was sobbing so hard I could hardly hear her. I told everyone to leave, she mumbled, voice trembling. I couldn't marry him, I feel like such a fool. Was it all really a lie? I closed my eyes, feeling a pang in my chest. Harriet, I can't say what was or wasn't real for you, but he lied to me for years, just like he lied to you. A long silence, then she exhaled raggedly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for telling me, otherwise, who knows? Maybe we'd be married by now and I'd spend whatever time I have left living in denial. My children think I'm a fool for almost marrying him. God, I feel so ashamed. A swirl of pity welled up inside me. I hated Harriet for her role in my heartbreak, but I also realized she was just another one of Robert's illusions. Maybe part of her had simply yearned for the old days, for nostalgia. Maybe she'd believed the same sweet lines I once did. I should have slammed the phone down, relished her crying, but I couldn't. She was as lost as I'd been. All you can do is move forward, I managed. You'll be all right. Harriet's tears flowed. I'm so sorry, Penny, so sorry. I let the apology hang in the air. Goodbye, Harriet, I said quietly, then ended the call. I leaned against the kitchen wall, tears finally falling. The sorrow for all those wasted years, for the heartbreak, for Harriet, for Robert, for everything. Yet underneath it, I sensed a gentle relief.
Okay.
2 weeks after the ruined wedding, Robert came back to the house, his key still working in the front door. He limped in with hunched shoulders, seeming even older than he was. The real estate fiasco had come to light, Harriet had called off the wedding, and everyone who once admired him was turning away. He walked up to me in the living room, eyes watery. It's all gone, Penny. Harriet said I used her. She told people the wedding was canceled. My name's being dragged through the mud. People are furious with me. I stared at him without sympathy. What do you want me to say? He began to speak, then closed his mouth. He grabbed my hand, trying to kneel. I'm sorry, I messed up. Please forgive me. Come on, we can fix our marriage, can't we? Part of me almost laughed. He didn't love Harriet. He didn't love me either. He loved himself. Harriet exposed him, so he scurried back to me, hoping I might rescue him from humiliation. But it was too late. He wasn't the man I thought I'd married, or perhaps he'd never been that man at all. I pulled my hand away, stepping back. No, we're done, Robert. The divorce filing is already in progress. You should have the papers served next week. His face crumpled. I felt no satisfaction, only calm. He pleaded with me for a while, then tried anger, then threats, then guilt. But none of it mattered. I'd given all I could to this marriage. By the time he left, the sun was setting. I watched him drive off, the shape of his car shrinking down the road, and let out a breath of raw relief. This was my life now, and I had to build it anew.
Okay.
The divorce proceeded in a blur of signatures and legalities. We sold the house. I found a modest but charming bungalow in another part of town. For the first time in years, I was living alone, really alone. It was scary, but also exhilarating. I set up my grandmother's old rocking chair by the window, decorated with a cheap second-hand sofa I painted bright turquoise, hung colorful curtains. I remember standing in the middle of that small living room, thinking, this is all mine, no illusions attached. Harriet and I never became friends exactly. But one day, months after everything, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She was with one of her grandchildren, a pretty teen who was swirling a frappuccino. Harriet caught my eye across the counter, our gazes locked. A wave of memories flashed between us, the phone calls, the wedding day meltdown, the tears. She nodded to me just once, an acknowledgement, not quite forgiveness, not quite apology, but a quiet thank you. I nodded back. We didn't speak further. We'd both endured Robert's betrayal in different ways. As for Robert, I heard through the grapevine that he was living with his nephew in a cramped condo. His finances never recovered from that real estate fiasco, and Harriet refused all contact. Whenever I spotted him in the grocery store or post office, he looked older, shoulders sagging in regret. I'd pass him by, heart steady, continuing my day unruffled. The man I'd once loved was just a stranger now. Sometimes I thought about Harriet's wedding that never happened. And yes, a swirl of guilt would knot in my stomach. Ruining a wedding, even one so ill-conceived, felt cruel. But Harriet had forced me to appear. She wanted me to watch them vow their eternal love. She gave me no chance to voice my side until I demanded it. And I realized something crucial. Women who get steamrolled might wear a polite smile, but we have our limits. When cornered, we find courage in the unlikeliest places. I found mine that day in the chapel. I told 3 truths Harriet needed to hear. Maybe I saved her from a marriage as lifeless as mine became. Maybe I just wanted Robert to face consequences for once. Either way, it set me free. And from that day on, I decided I'd never swallow my voice for someone else's convenience again.
Oh my,
It's been 2 years since all of that. I've done plenty of healing, some therapy, some travel, even dated a bit, though nothing serious yet. My life is simple. I manage a small antiques booth part-time, volunteer at the local animal shelter, and host Sunday brunch for my girlfriends. Sometimes we laugh about men, about heartbreak, about how unpredictable life can be. And on quiet evenings, I sit in my little bungalow, drink peppermint tea, and feel gratitude. At an age I never expected, I learned an invaluable lesson. That, sometimes, speaking the painful truth is the only way to break chains we didn't even know were binding us. So if you ever find yourself forced to witness a wedding you don't believe in, to bless a union that stabs your heart, remember my story. You have a right to speak, to shed light on what they want to keep hidden. It might shatter illusions. It might ruin the day, but it might just set you free.